thank you all for coming. This is an exciting event. I'm excited that a lot of people care about this problem and trying to figure it out in the Bay Area, because it is a complex and really hard problem, especially for all ages. That's why we chose this event. So if we can go to the next slide, that will go over the agenda. So the agenda for tonight, first I'm going to talk a little bit about framing the conversation, and we'll do the introductions of the speakers, and then we'll go in the speaker panel where they're going to give their advice and best tips and practices for people. And then we'll go in the Q&A session where you guys can either raise your hand or you'll text a phone number, which will appear on the screen when we get there. And then we'll close out. Alrighty, so if we want to go to the next slide. So why is this event going on? Because we want to address the life challenges with practical and motivating workshops. We put together a One Village team here at Saratoga Federated Church that's really trying to solve this problem of how do we get more intergenerational activity. And so one of the experiments we're kind of running with this is putting on events like these that kind of address more of the practical issues people have to face. We also want to show that people, to the members of the congregation and the community around us, that the church really does care about these needs, the social, physical, vocational, and educational and emotional needs that people have. This housing event is a pain for all generations. I've had several people come up to me and say, there's no way you live in the Bay Area. So it brings a lot of angst and worry and just a lot of nervousness for people in their lives. So we want to try and help people and smooth out this process. How we're going to know we're successful is that we hope you guys get at least one new thing you didn't already know and hopefully apply in the next week. And we also want to make connections with people in the same boat as you are. So if you're going through, how do you help your family member trying to get housing, of all that. So can I just get a quick raise of the hand? Who is kind of looking in the next maybe year to 3 years about housing, either renting or owning? Does anyone? Okay. And then who's kind of beyond that? Or they're kind of just exploring, planning stage? Is that, sorry, what? Okay. There we go. So we got some people we need to help bring back. So you kind of saw, we have a good mix of people here tonight. Dave Anoon is my partner, and we are, obviously trying to find future topics. We are not paid for by the church. We are doing this because we really have a heart for trying to help people. So let us know. We'll have a survey at the end where you guys can tell us what you thought of the event and future topics you'd like to see, because we are all putting it for you guys, the audience and the community. We are not trying to do our own thing. We're trying to do it and help people. And if you have any locations in future mind, we don't have to always host it at the church. We are looking at other options, maybe like the Foothill Club or other places. Just let us know if you have any ideas. And we are looking for future team members, so people who are excited to kind of help put on events like this. Please let us know, because we are eager looking for help. So if we can go to the next slide. So thank you all for being here tonight. The pizza's arrived, so you can help yourselves while I do some of the introductions. So tonight's moderator is David Welsh. He's a longtime friend. We went to the same high school, King's Academy. He is going to get married in this summer, and so he is great. He's here because he's now trying to figure out, do I rent, do I buy a place, what do I do? So it's great having him here. Tracy Pena on the left. She is a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker. She has a lot of years of expertise of helping people try and figure out this housing deal. Karen in the middle is also with Coldwell. She has a background in kind of finance and helping people not only with real estate, but kind of life planning in general. And our last, Celeste, she is a senior lending officer at Bank of America. We originally were going to have Will Clark, who was a young adult homeowner, but unfortunately he is sick. So Celeste, at the last moment, came in, jumped in, and so we're really excited to have her here. So with that, I will pass it over to David, who will begin the speaking portion of the event.
Thank you, Max. All right. Y'all hear me all right? I think all right. Great. So yeah, as Max said, I'm a long-time friend of his, and this could not be more relevant to me because we're both a couple years out of college, and my fiance and I, sitting over here in the corner, we're both looking to figure out where we're going to land and are highly considering either renting or buying a place in the Bay Area. And so I will hopefully have some good follow-up questions as you go. So let's start with each of you. We can just have you introduce yourself and then maybe give just a few general pieces of advice, your just take on the situation in the Bay Area. We'll start at the end with you, Tracy.
I'm Tracy Pina. Been with Coldwell Banker and one prior brokerage before that for 17 years now. Outside of real estate, I'm a mom. My favorite part about working with buyers is probably that moment when they walk in the house and you just know by their body language that this is the one for them, because you can tell by the way they act that they love it. So that's always an exciting moment. And then for sellers, my favorite part is really getting their house ready. I love doing the whole, let's transform your house into what a buyer will want and pay top dollar for, because every seller seems to want the highest possible price. So that's what we do.
I'm Karen DeLulo, and I attend church here as well. And I'm at Coldwell Banker. Actually, Tracy and I work together a bit. And I have kind of a different past. I started off in real estate development. I did some stock brokerage with Merrill Lynch. And I did some property management for many years, and now I've been doing real estate. So I've combined kind of all of my experience set, and so I do a lot of goal setting and goal planning. So when people need to get from A to B, whether it's their first home or maybe downsizing or upsizing, when I work with people, one of the things I like to do is treat their money as if it's mine. So I try to always have them think about, there's the long-term effects and there's the tax situation. So to keep all of those things in mind in the same basket. So.
Hello, thanks for coming this evening. I was very excited to be a part of this. I happen to know Tracy and Karen personally and have worked with them in the past. I've been in the lending industry for 15 years now, but prior to working at Bank of America, I was a broker. Broker world is very different than the banking world. So, and I'm really excited today to talk about first-time buyer programs, helping you figure out, can you buy, how can I buy, what kind of loan, who should I talk to, how do I plan for it?
Great. Wonderful. Yeah, I think to start out, let's just, we were chatting earlier about just something it seemed like you were all agreeing is, no matter where you are, as soon as you can, just get a foot in the door. If you haven't been able to invest in real estate in the past, just being able to start as early as possible. So maybe you could just share about kind of the general outlook. One of you had shared with me this, just a simple graph here. You can sort of see the housing market from 2009 into 2019. It's clearly, it's nearly doubled, and so as it could still continue to rise, and we were talking a little bit about that. So if you could each maybe just share a little bit about the general whole picture and what it looks like investing in that today, and what do you think are some things that you should be ready for? What should your life look like if you decide it should be time to buy?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay. I thought the chart was really interesting because it never feels like the right time to buy because you never feel like you have enough money. And that chart is showing 185, I think, % growth since 2009. And so it really is a good time, no matter what time it is, because we have this wonderful lifestyle in the Bay Area that everybody keeps wanting to move here. There continues to be jobs. So if you can get in, it's just good to get in. And what I've seen work really well for my buyers that are on a budget is have an option like a plan A and a plan B. And plan A is like, okay, if I can get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home with a garage that I can park my car in, that's great. And if I can't, then I'll settle for a condo or a townhome. And have both plans, and then talk to your realtor and look at everything. And a lot of times what ends up happening is they still can't get what they want, but buy something anyway. So maybe it's only a 2-bedroom. but just get your foot in the door so that you're starting to build equity so that you can move up and then you can just make money off of what you're living in.
Yeah, I think I'll just pick up
Jump
where you
in.
left off. So I think just getting a little placeholder, even if it's smaller than maybe you plan on staying in, but it's so much nicer if you can pay your own mortgage rather than someone else's. So when you're renting, you're paying someone else's mortgage. When you're, owning, even if it's something small, you're paying your own mortgage. So that's more money back into your pocket long term. Additionally, I think when you have that placeholder, what I've found with people that are trying to start out, they've worked really hard to save this certain amount of money. Maybe it's 10% or whatever. They've saved, this little chunk of money, and they really want this other house that's a lot higher. But if you invest it now, that can probably grow faster than you can save. So, if you can only save, let's say, $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it is a month, there's a good chance if you buy a piece of property, it's going to go up faster than you can save. So that's part of the placeholder mentality, is just to try to just get your foot in the door, and local property, because we have these wonderful, strong companies, we have wonderful weather, probably the best weather in the world, and we just have a constant influx of people coming in. It doesn't seem like it's going to be very weak in the foreseeable future. So I think it's still a strong and very liquid investment.
And to that point, because I know Celeste wants to jump in with the low programs, but to that point, the market is going to, your return on your investment is going to be greater if you're getting in at the lowest entry point. And so just getting yourself in the door, you're probably going to make more money. And then I think Karen and I both always have this, every buyer always likes what's just out of their reach. And so you're not alone, no matter what the price point is. Like literally no matter what the price point is, everybody always likes the home that is just out of their reach. So
And
don't feel like that's only you.
Yeah, and then it's funny too, I heard this parent telling his daughter when I was working with her, he said, and if it's easy to buy, you're not buying enough. You need to be, it needs to be slightly painful.
Yeah.
So you should try and stretch on your purchase perhaps a little bit. I mean, not out of, crazy, but I mean, stretch a little bit, because it's very easy to grow out of your first house.
Yeah.
So, just do the best you can on your first go.
I think
Economics, yeah.
the three of us agree that there's nothing more important than just getting into the market. And what does that mean? That means you need to think outside of the box, or you need people to help you think outside of the box. Because I know the family members, the kids in my family, there's no way I can do this or do that. How do you know? We haven't even explored to see what it is you can afford. And if you can afford it, you get a write-off. And how does that impact your monthly income, allowing you to afford something? So I have a passion for helping people get into homes as much as I do any other homes that are in the obviously immediate area. But you make our industry go round, and we've all started from somewhere. Like when I say think outside of the box, what I'm saying is sometimes perhaps, like when I bought my first property, it happened to be with a girlfriend because she couldn't afford to buy anything and I couldn't afford to buy anything. So we bought together. We see a lot of people, families do that as well. So there's going to be an inch of a sacrifice, and kind of like Karen said, my brother said, you know what, Celeste, you just have to jump in, you have to do it, it'll be painful, but your income will increase over time. And sacrificing, I drove a 66 VW Bug for about 3 years. So there's trade-offs, you know what I'm saying? You really have to think about what those are.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think you make all a very compelling case that even if it seems a little bit out of reach to, scrap together what you can, and right when you do feel like you can get there financially, it probably makes sense. So
Yeah.
I want to address what kind of can be the potential roadblockers for people. I think one of them is, I know certainly for us, there's kind of the picture of the financial capacity, and then the kind of the risk capacity / how long can you commit to living. So starting off with just kind of the financial roadblockers, I think let's start with you, Celeste. I know you know about this first-time homebuyers programs that can sometimes break down that wall. So I want to share about that.
So I'm really excited because I met with Cindy Chavez, who's the supervisor for District 2. And I met with her personally because I was so excited about the Santa Clara County program they have for first-time buyers. So what's the definition of a first-time buyer? The definition of a first-time buyer is someone who hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years. So it doesn't mean never owned a home. And what's very cool about this program is there's no mortgage insurance to pay. And there's a couple programs. The first one I'll talk about briefly is they will give you up to 17% down payment. And you make no payment on that money. So I'll now explain a little bit. The other 3%, the banks and the county want you to have skin in the game. But what's nice about the 3% is so half of that 3% can be gifted, fully gifted. So that's impressive because most banks and things like that don't like being too much of gifted funds, let's just say, for first-time buyers. Nonetheless, the other first-time buyer programs that have been around for a very long time are FHA, but most people get priced out of being able to qualify for an FHA mortgage because you usually can only buy up to 456, something like that, and you end up purchasing something that has homeowners dues monthly. So that really hits your bottom line and your ability to qualify. This program, you can purchase up to $800,000. It's an equity share program. There are no tricks. Karen and I first talked about it. She's like, Celeste, you know.
I really grilled her on this, by the way.
Yeah, because
Since that's my thing.
yeah.
But it's good. It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of like a family member lending you 17% to buy that house. And I can get into more. I don't know if you want me to get into it now, but it's an equity share, and it gives you a start for being able to purchase something with a minimum down payment and no mortgage insurance.
Which makes the payment much
It
lower.
makes the payment smaller, and it makes it more affordable without the mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance is insurance to any lending institution that you're going to pay it back, basically. Or if you don't, someone else is. So not having that expense, which is very expensive because typically you have to pay mortgage insurance up front with FHA. I mean, they let you lend or borrow the money, and then they lend you money on the majority of the down payment, which is 3%. And then you have to pay mortgage insurance on top of that. So you borrow for mortgage insurance up front, and then you have to pay monthly. And that can really make or break your ability to qualify.
Yeah.
So as I understand, is it basically once you've completed this type of a mortgage with this program, you would own like 83%, where the provider has like the 17% stake at the end after you've paid it off?
So there's a couple different ways it works, and I don't want to take up too much time because we've got some great folks that are here to talk. But they will lend you up to 17%. You make no payment. There is the other, so what happens is you have the 17%, and at 10 years, it's a 30-year loan. It's not something, it's not an ARM loan, 7-1 ARM, none of that. There's no prepayment penalties, there's no tricks. So before the end of 10 years, you have an option, right? If you refinance, sell, cash out, anything like that, you then have to pay the 17% back, which means you've gained equity. And then there's a percentage that, in terms of the equity, if you eliminate yourself from the loan the first 10 years, you only have to pay a cap of $30,000 in equity back. If you keep it, you can keep it 30 years. That's not a problem. But the program is meant for people to get started so that the money goes back into the county program to help everyone else.
Great. So just really quickly, what would be if you're interested in applying for this program, what would be the next step to take to either apply or see if you could apply?
I think you
Talk
really,
to Celeste.
yeah, I think you need to talk to somebody who, and you guys jump in, but I think what's the most important thing about having a loan officer is I see my job is to show you what all your options are, and it's up to you to decide how to spend your money. And that's sort of what I like about the business, is because it's like playing chess. If this, then that, then that, then this. So the important thing is having someone to talk to and somebody who can, even if there's programs that I don't do, I'm very well aware of what those are. And, maybe there's something else that might be able to help. And you could, I can introduce you to somebody who does a loan for your particular case.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. I'll definitely personally be looking more into the program. So next I want to talk about maybe some of the other barriers people have, or either self-imposed or that are very real. So more on just the side of taking on this risk. I know for us, we are probably capable financially, but we're not so sure that we're ready to commit just to living around here for the amount of time that would make sense. So maybe could you touch on what would you make sure is the minimum amount of time you can commit to staying at a place? And are there other ways, if you want to have the option to later leave, to then get a tenant and keep the property, whether or not that makes sense? Maybe let's start with Tracy.
Okay, for sure, that's exactly what you should do, is buy a place, and then if your job takes you out of the area or you decide for a change of life you want to leave the area, if you can hold on to your property in California, that's always a great thing. And it's pretty easy to self-manage a tenant, especially if you only have one. But at the same time, you can hire a property manager to do it. But the opportunity for rental income is probably the highest in the Bay Area. So if you buy in the Bay Area, it makes a ton of sense to hold on to it as much as you can. And the market, we had talked about this earlier, the market's not jumping. It's not going to appreciate a ton over the next 2 to 5 years. It's just a slow, steady increase. And so I was saying to David, you really have to think about where you're going to plant yourself, because in the past years you could buy, and in 3 years you've made $300,000 and you can move up. Well, now it's a little bit different market where you may not make such strong gains, so you really have to be more strategic and think about, am I going to be happy in this town or wherever you choose to live, the neighborhood? Or am I going to get good rental income off of it? I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so would you say, even if, say you only knew for certain that you were going to be working 1 calendar year, but then you were like, I definitely would like to hang on to the real estate and maybe live elsewhere. Would it make sense with that amount of certainty, or what do you think?
Well, I think it all boils down to what your financial and investment goals are. And it kind of goes back to when I first meet with buyers, I always show them, this is the team that I work with, and one of the people is a financial planner. So if you don't have a financial planner, this is a financial planner that can help you form your life goals, because it's important when you're starting out and you think about, the future of kids, college tuition, retirement, house, so how it all fits in. So it really just depends on what your financial goals would be.
Okay, very helpful. Do you want to add to that anything?
I think just in general, because the rental market is so strong here, even if you were only committing to a shorter period of time, maybe 1 year turns into 2 years or whatever, but I think there's a very good chance that you can, hop around and try other places. If, let's say, you say, well, I'm going to try Southern California, or I'm going to try somewhere else. By keeping your placeholder here, if you try something else and it doesn't work out, you can still come back, and you can probably rent the place for something similar to the mortgage, or hopefully pay the mortgage entirely. And,
That's great. Would you say the Bay Area is a place where the rent can typically pay off the mortgage, or something?
probably not on the first day, but the longer you hold the property, the more so, yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. So before we switch to sort of the rental opportunities, I also just want to get a bit of a sense, what kind of other more maybe fringe options, or if you feel like you still can't quite committing to a typical house. I know there's mobile homes in places, and there's, I don't know, all sorts of different options. Sometimes you can find a fixer-upper kind of place. What would you say, and maybe personally recommend or not recommend, around non-traditional ways of getting some kind of equity?
Well,
I just sold a mobile home.
yeah,
Those are tough in the Bay Area, but the benefit is the Bay Area is going up in value, so even mobile homes are going up. But traditionally, mobile homes go down in value, they depreciate, and you pay a lot in space rent. And the nicest parks are usually the retirement parks, which are 55 and over communities. And the tough thing about those is you have to have a certain amount of income to qualify for the park. So they're not a slam dunk by any means. And then the other thing you have to watch out for is you don't own the land, and so you have to check when the park's land lease is up. Because if it's 10 years from now, then it's an unknown as to what's going to happen to you and your mobile home when the land lease goes up, because who knows what that owner of the land decides to do. So there's a lot of things you need to be careful about with mobile homes. I always think it's a good idea if you really want to invest and you can't afford something in the Bay Area, is look at other areas that are growing. So a lot of Bay Area residents that are leaving are going to Oregon. Texas was hot a couple years ago. Idaho was hot a couple years ago. But right now it's really Portland and Portland areas. And that is projected to grow like the Bay Area, and so is anything in the Washington, Seattle area. So if you can't afford here, maybe you take your money and you invest it somewhere where you see a lot of opportunity for growth, and you can get in at 200,000, 400,000 and watch your money grow and just own that as a opportunity.
I think waiting for the time to be right, this is something that I work with a lot of engineers in the valley, and they're waiting for the perfect time, the perfect interest rate, the perfect everything, and I tell them, look, buying a home is like catching a falling knife. It's never going to be perfect. So you need to make a decision. You need to go with the rate that there is, trust both the real estate agent as well as the lending officer, and make a decision. The other thing, I think, a very, very good point that Tracy brought up, and I know Karen feels the same, is one thing you have to remember, it's the land that's worth the money, not the house that sits on it. And I learned that from, what's her name, passed away now.
Oh, yeah.
How could I forget her name?
Can't remember.
But she said that, I remember hearing that back about 6 years ago, and I thought, okay, that's really strange. Who thinks like that? Well, the point is, land isn't finite. So in the Bay Area, more importantly, owning some of the land. So for example, when you buy a mobile home, you don't own the land. So that's why the values don't increase as much. Same thing happens with the condo. You don't own the land. So condos never went up in value as much as a home. And,
Yeah, and you have less flexibility. So one of the things I've been recommending to some of my clients is to move just out a little bit farther. So many people have the ability to do, if you're still working or if you're working part-time, so many people can work from home. They only commute maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week. So there are some really nice outer rim areas where you can still commute to San Francisco within an hour, taking BART. I just helped a really nice family buy their second home, which they're using as a rental, but I think it'd be a great first home for some people too. Just outside of Livermore, Tracy area. And it was a lovely 4-bedroom home, about 2,400 square feet, beautiful neighborhood, $465,000, and they're within 1 hour of San Francisco commute. So that is, it may not be ideal, it might be a little hotter out that direction, but I think if it were me, if I had a choice of buying a home for $465,000, a little bit, over the hill versus buying a condo here for $600, I would probably prefer to do the commute for a little bit. And then again, as things kind of change and your situation improves, you can always move closer in. But I think having the land, I call it the gold rush is now the dirt. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to get your little piece of California, get your dirt.
Okay, but on the flip side, when the market went down, all those outlying areas, everybody lost their shirts on their investments because those dropped off. And when the market goes down, it tends to be the areas farther out go down. So
But I think with, in our particular area, so if you just compare the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, which is getting larger and wider, to all of the other big cities in the world, Hong Kong, Japan, London, Paris, New York City. If you look at all of those mega cities that are big job centers, we're a huge job center for the US. We all know that, right? We have all these huge companies, and a lot of them are doing so well right now that they don't even have to make money next year because they have so much money in their coffers this year and all the prior years. It's not like when I was growing up here and my dad worked at Lockheed, and if they were having a tough year that year, they would do layoffs, or HP would do layoffs. These other companies used to do layoffs when they had hard years. These companies are practically bulletproof because they have so much money in the coffers because they're all listed on the stock exchange. They've sold their stock, their ownership values. So the truth is, they have lots of cash. They invest lots of cash into real estate and other things. So I think that we have such a strong market situation and such a unique situation here. I would say, compared to all of those big international cities that are doing quite well and have, huge budgets and incomes and, things like we do here, their price per square foot is way higher than ours. I mean, a lot higher. So, when you think about it on a global scale, we're actually undervalued for what we have. Hard to believe, but.
Well, the other thing is, when I had mentioned think outside of the box, one thing to do is to think about the next area that's going to have a boom and grow. I grew up in San Jose, and Oakland is booming, and a lot of millennials are buying there for lots of reasons. And Alameda County also has a first-time buyers program. It's different, but it's a program. And why do the kids living there? Because they have, the commute is shorter. They have transit to get to San Francisco if that's where they prefer to work. But, Tracy, Livermore, even Morgan Hill was the boondocks, right? So now everybody, the sacrifice is you're going to have to live outside of, maybe not right here in the immediate area, but think outside the box of when the next big area is going to boom, where people are going to want to live.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful to know kind of those other opportunities nearby. I want to get on to questions really soon. Right before, let me just ask one other question, just for the people that are still, it seems like there's a very, very strong case made for get into real estate as soon as you can. Once you can afford it, just pull the trigger. What would you say for someone that is still considering renting? What would a picture look like where you think it would make sense just to choose to rent around here? Say find a simple place for around $2,000 a month, something like that. Would you ever recommend it? And if so, what would your life look like in that case?
Absolutely. I think rentals are a great way to start, because you're not having to see, usually the first barrier is that people have to have a ton of money to get into a home. So if you don't have a down payment, or maybe, the 1.5 might be easier to get to. But if you're trying to regroup and get your finances in order to where you can actually buy something that you'd like to live in, renting is the best option. It's very cheap. For $2,000 a month, you could be renting something that's worth $600,000 or $700,000 on its own. So, you couldn't afford that, but you can afford this. And hopefully whatever you decide to rent, if you're feeling that it's kind of tight, kind of like Celeste did when she was getting started as well, it's not a bad idea to have a roommate. Even as adults, it may not always seem like an ideal situation, but I think if you have a clear picture of what, is going to be each other's responsibilities and what things are going to happen, I think that's a good way to go to save money.
My story's even more dire than that. It's funny, man. We had no furniture.
You sold a car for
I sold a new car. And, we had, my friend, we had no furniture. We had lawn furniture in the living room. And, but we knew that the investment at some point would help us together, right? Because she was looking to buy by herself, I couldn't buy. And we bought an area that no one wanted to live in, which is outside of Willow Glen, where El Rancho Drive-In used to be. And that, people are like, who wants to live there? Well, yeah, we lived across the street from a bowling alley. Now it's boomed, so, you have to have a little thinking outside of the box and allow yourself to investigate whether or not you can buy.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to the rental question?
I think the only thing I can think of is it's a good time to rent if you think the market's going to go down and you're going to be able to buy, like maximize your money, and you can rent for a really good price if you have like a good deal on a place, rent control, those sorts of things.
So if the opportunity is right and you don't not ready for the risk. Great. Well, that's very helpful. We now want to open up the floor. We want to make sure your questions are answered. So we're going to start. You can either just raise your hand and Dave will come around with a microphone, or you can, if you don't want to ask publicly or you prefer texting, you can text that number on the screen and then I'll get your question here. So for starters, does anyone have any questions off the top of their head?
Sure. Hi everybody, Eric Dunstan. Can you hear me okay? This is on? I'm also a realtor as well, at Serena Group. As far as the first time home buyer, an actual question to you guys. You guys talk about conceptually home being an investment. There's some financial advisors say you don't look at your home as an investment, you look at it as a place to live. What's your opinion of that? We're talking about gotta buy, when's the time to buy, am I gonna lose money? But some people say it's just a place to live. And the fact that we're so lucky that we have appreciation, that we're able to make money, but if you bank on it, that your financial health could be a little bit cattywampus, if you will. So what's your perspective as a financial advisor? Is it better to rent, or you protect your, just the perspective?
I think you need to look at your overall portfolio. It can't be just all in housing, and it can't be just all in 401k and other investments. I mean, and I think people get talked out of buying a home by people who invest your money because they don't make money on you buying a home. They make money off you investing your money with them.
I think it depends on the different areas. For example, I had a family member who, lived in Pennsylvania for many, many years. I think she bought her home for about $180-something thousand. And about 30 years later, she sold it for about $195. She made like a whole $15,000, and she probably put, $150 into it. But the point is, in other areas where housing is much more affordable, it's not a huge percentage of their net worth. Here, just by the nature of the beast, it is usually a person's number one place of net worth, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure, depending on your situation. But I think if that is your number one asset, and that if you have $1 million home, but you haven't been able to save $1 million that you have in bonds or securities or something, you do need to treat it also as an investment. It can't be just left to become shabby. You need to take care of it because it's part of your financial future if it's your number one holding. So.
Great, that's very helpful. It's definitely a good consideration to make, and you definitely don't want to be completely exposed to have everything tied to something. The next question I got texted, what is a good credit score and how could you make it better?
This is a Celeste
That's her-
question,
yeah,
but I'm
your
pretty sure
domain.
it's 680. Am I guessing right?
Yeah,
680 or higher?
The program I was speaking of is 680, but here's what's important to know about credit. And just quickly, a few things. One is, don't close accounts. Like if you've had a credit card and you've had it for a very long time and the interest rate's super high, just use it with $5, pay it off, $5, pay it off, because the longer you've had that credit, it improves your score. The other thing is, when people pull your credit, there's 3 types of credit. One is revolving, which is credit card. The next is installment, which is auto, and the next is mortgage. All 3 use different algorithms for qualifying you. So the score that you see online is not the same score that a bank's going to pull when they use their algorithm to pull your credit. And what the banks do is they take the middle score. So you have 3 scores, they take the middle. If you're a couple, they take the lower of the middle scores. So it's important to keep track of your credit, and you don't necessarily have to have a lot of credit to have your credit score be good. The minimum is about 680 for most programs. I know there's brokers that'll go down to 580, but I don't really promote those types of programs because there's always some other way they get you, which is a much higher interest rate.
And what would you say is the best strategy to just efficiently build a credit? Either repair it or build it?
Auto pay. I would say auto pay.
Yeah.
Auto pay your bills online.
Yeah.
So you're making it like the
Never miss a
hitting the
payment.
yeah, never miss a payment. But Celeste,
But you need a major credit card, and you can have a Macy's or whatever. So with this program, you don't have to have a full amount of established credit. With FHA, you can use, they call it alternative credit. So if you've been making your cell phone payment or Xfinity, that kind of thing, they will use that as alternative credit. But most traditional lending institutions want to see 3 types. And one of it could be, student debt you're paying off. The other could be just a credit card that you've had or a Macy's department store card. And it doesn't have to have a high balance. And the minimum payments, so let me just say one thing, because I think this is really important to get to. And that is, interest rates are all made up of the same thing. For example, it's your credit score that matters. It's your loan amount. It's the property type. And it is the type of loan that you're getting. If someone doesn't know all those things, debt to income ratio. If someone doesn't know all those things about you and they quote you an interest rate, they're baiting you 100%. Because every lending institution uses the same things to create an interest rate. So if you're shopping for a rate, you need to be sure you're looking at apples to apples.
All right, so very helpful. It sounds like nothing else. Definitely never miss a payment. Get your auto pay and get a major credit card to start building that. All right, the next question is, it's hard to save for a down payment. I've heard some people borrow from their 401k. Is that smart?
Yeah, because you're paying yourself back. But that payment, one thing to remember is that payment comes out of each paycheck. So if you get 2 checks a month, you better make sure you understand what that payment is, because there's going to be 2 of those be taken out. So people forget that when they're going to purchase. And that payment that you're making to yourself also hits your debt to income ratio, just like a new auto that you're paying $500 a month for, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Okay, next question. When I start budgeting, what percentage of my budget should go to living expenses? What is normal? What is really high?
The rule of thumb for real estate is 30%. Usually you want to have 30% of your income paying for your housing. So that's kind of just a basic, that's a basic number. So if you earn, $2,000 a month, you should only be paying about $600 in mortgage.
do you think that's realistic in the Bay Area?
No, you have to have a roommate.
Yeah. I mean, because when you look, that's what a debt to income ratio is. So there are thresholds for that, and that's how banks measure what your interest rate should be. So with FHA, you can have a 50% debt to income ratio. What is that? That's your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And they take it off of your gross income. And then they come up with the formula, which determines your debt to income ratio. And that includes, in addition to that, other credit card payments, the total of the minimum payments that you make. So Kieran's right, that's practical, but the thing is it's not practical, especially for people who are buying for the first time. They may not be in their career long enough, or they may be, winding down their career and are in an upper age group like myself.
Yeah.
Very helpful. I want to make sure we again open the floor. Does anyone have a question they want to ask here? Yes.
Friends Church in Santa Cruz built 24 units on the church property. Can we do something like this here, put senior housing in here or pastoral housing on the property, or Is it just zoning, are they being just so too difficult? Because there's a church, the Alberton Valley, could put senior housing in too. They have a big lot that's just covered with weeds. Santa Cruz is doing it. Is it Santa Clara just too hard to work with?
That's a great question. I don't know if any of you know off the top of your head for this case of this church. What do
I
you
would
think?
guess it's
don't
zoning.
know. Yeah.
I think that's a question for Saratoga, not Saratoga Federated, right?
So
Right.
it could be something to check with the
And now
county.
you're mixing commercial property with residential property. And if it's not zoned for both, if the city or the county, they don't zone it for both, then they can't build. And whatever the owner wants to do, who owns the land. But I think if they got a huge tax break, they might think about it, which is important. That's what they did for senior housing for probably the last 20 years. Give the developer a price break on offering Section 8 housing, as well as lower income housing and senior.
How much for the property tax, if you buy a house, for one thing?
That's an important question.
Yeah, so another thing is reverse mortgage these days. You see commercial all the time. My friend did that. It was really bad.
Yeah.
If they do that, why do the government stop that? It's really, really sad because they almost lost the house.
Yes.
It
You
depends
know.
on who you go to.
Thank you.
Yeah, it depends
Yeah,
on who you're working with.
Yeah, I usually never recommend a reverse mortgage because it has a lot of tentacles. It has a lot of things that are, I don't want to say hidden because it's not something I've ever promoted, but I think that there's a lot of things they don't tell you, and unfortunately you experience the hard way. But and then when that person, maybe if they've put a reverse mortgage in place, and if they, let's say pass away or whatever, it has to be sold in a very short period of time, like 30 days. I mean, it's a really tough one. So I never recommend that. Whenever people say, what do you think about this? I always try and come up with other solutions because they've got a problem, so we try and find other solutions. As far as taxes, our tax rates are pretty set. It's usually set on whatever your purchase price is, and then it goes up slowly over the years. So if you buy this year versus having bought 30 years ago, people, even if they live next door to each other, they could be paying very different taxes. Sometimes it seems fair, unfair, but I guess the idea is once you buy at a certain rate, the local Santa Clara County tax collector tries not to increase it more than a certain amount every year. So they do increase it to try and get closer to what the actual property value should be, but they don't usually get there fast. It's a very slow road. And if you're lucky enough to be a Prop 13 owner, it's frozen for a long time. And I think there's a possibility that might get repealed at some point because it was voted in. It could also get voted out. But I think, because in some situations, someone may be paying $400 a year while someone else is paying, $40,000 a year and they live next to each other. It just seems a bit unfair. So I think that may or may not, right now it's voted in, so it's the way it is. But I think that might change, as time goes by.
Yeah, it's really hurting a lot of people because, first of all, Prop 13 was great, especially if you were elderly, but you should not be able to gift the tax base to your kids when they inherit the property. That's a problem. And it's come to roost, actually. I mean, my mom had Prop 13. We inherited the tax base. Do I think that's fair to everyone else? No. When you the other thing that's important for first-time buyers is understanding what your taxes are going to be, and it's by county. So Santa Clara County, it's 1.25% of the purchase price. That's what you pay monthly. Okay, and it hasn't changed in 15 years. I don't know if you guys have seen it change. It's never
No.
changed.
No.
I had a first-time buyer buy in Oakland, and when she was purchasing, the underwriter just put in for 1.25 because we can't dictate what the taxes are going to be. It's the county that does. The problem is Oakland's property taxes went up every year. It did go down a little bit, but it's 1.366. That's a huge payment to make. You know, it's cheaper to buy the house there, but the city is charging people more in taxes
Yeah.
for different things. So you
And-
have to make sure you are aware
Yeah.
of the tax.
And even going to some outerlying areas, like I did do some analysis for clients looking to invest in Austin, Texas. And one of the things people don't realize, the house prices are really small, but then the actual taxes are so much higher. They're even, 3, 4%, 4.5% higher than here. So it's a huge difference when you go from something like, 1.125 to 3 or 4.2. I mean, it's huge difference. So, I mean, the dollar amount is smaller, but they still have to build all of the infrastructure, the public water, all of the infrastructure. So that's why they still have to charge a certain amount. So it's multiple.
Typically, you don't pay that much in taxes, and you're paying a lot in, when you purchase,
Mortgage?
When you purchase
Assess-
something.
Assessment, sales tax,
Sales
yeah,
tax.
local taxes, yeah.
Yeah, like, I have 2 friends that live in Oregon who pay a lot in sales tax. They don't, and their property taxes are really high. Most people think it's the reverse because it's cheaper to live there. There is no sales tax in Oregon. I'm sorry, there's no sales tax, but their property taxes are high. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is very helpful. It sounds like it's safe to say, no matter what, really make sure you factor in property taxes with your monthly payment to make sure you can afford it. We have time for a few more questions before we wrap up. One I got texted. If I haven't even started looking at renting or buying, what is the best place to look to just get started? What's the first thing I should do?
Well, first, I think, where do you want to be? Where do you need to be? I mean, I think if you have choices, you have to kind of have a narrowing point. A lot of people will stay in the area maybe because they have family here or maybe because their job is here. So I think just looking at the factors and just like a lot of things, just kind of approach it like something you have to plan for. What are all the different factors? Okay, so I need to be within an hour or whatever of a certain point. So I think that's usually the starting point. We don't usually just come here for no reason. There's usually a reason, so.
Great. Does anyone else have, yeah?
So I have 2 questions. Currently, what is the median price range for a home in Santa Clara County?
I think it's about 1.2.
That's median.
Well, that's the average. The median.
That median being an average.
Yeah,
The
it's
average,
about,
yeah, 1.2.
But the median areas also, for example, I forgot to mention this, but Bank of America has a program where they will gift a first-time buyer $7,500 to put towards their closing costs. You don't pay it back. But it's based off census tracts, which the county puts together. So there are median incomes and low and high incomes within certain census tracts. So in order to use the it's up to 7,500, but if you want to use the 7,500, you have to work with someone like a loan officer who will work with your agent to help you find that area in order to take advantage.
But he's just asking about the.
Yeah, in general, yeah, it's what, I thought it was 1.1, it's 1.2
it's closer,
now.
1.2.
it's closer to 1.2 now, yeah.
My second question is, based on an article I read maybe 6, 7 years ago, the poverty level in Silicon Valley is $75,000 a year dual income.
Oh, yeah.
So how can a person afford an average home, which now has shrunk in size from when I first bought my very first home in San Jose, which was 2,300 square feet,
Yeah.
to now 1.2 million is buying what?
You can't buy
900 square feet?
Well, that's the point is they can't. That's why people are leaving the Bay Area that have been here for so long, because the people moving in are working for the tech companies and cashing out stock, and they're forcing people to move elsewhere. Sacramento has had a huge increase in transplants from the Bay Area, but then people in Sacramento are getting displaced because they're getting priced out of their homes.
Exactly.
So then where are they going? And they're going like to middle of the United States that Californians aren't going to. It's It's a huge problem. The chief economist for California Association of Realtors said the other day at a Coldwell Banker event, by 2025, California will be a majority renter state. That's how bad our housing problem is most people.
San Jose. No.
It's San Jose?
The city of San Jose will be over 50% rental.
The county
She had a
program
friend
is actually, so part of this county program to get first-time buyers into homes, as part of your Measure A, is also taking, I think they got they have a $950 million bond. So part of that money is set aside to help first-time buyers, okay? Other part of that money is they're building housing, affordable housing for people to purchase.
Yeah.
So it's gonna take some time, but at least they're executing. I mean, for the longest time, no one's been executing.
Yeah, and I think the medium home, maybe that's maybe a small 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you know, in San Jose or something. That's a typical 1 million too. So, you know, one of the things that we're saying is if you're just trying to get started or get that first home, you know, it might be a $600,000 condo that has 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, and you still have a place to live and you can start building equity. You know, I mean, there's got to be a starting point. So I think that would be probably more realistic. Yeah.
Oh, that's very helpful. It definitely is a dire situation, and it's at least good to be aware of what's going on there. We have one more question.
Yeah, 2 questions, actually. First of all, just kind of a refresher on what are the towns that are under rec control at the present time?
San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland are the locals. Almost all of our local cities and towns have rental rights, you know, things like that, renters' rights, you know, but the only places that actually have rental ordinances that you can't exceed are those 3 cities.
My second question is I had learned, this is a little while ago, but not that long ago, that the city of San Jose was trying to obviously encourage people to fix up homes that in neighborhoods that were rather run down. Some of them were around San Jose State. And they may have a special name for this program, but my understanding was that if you bought a home in some of those areas, and I'm going to ask you where they are, I think that the city would actually give you a subsidy to renovate, you know, kitchens or baths or whatever, which is a great thing to do. And I don't know if it's just a flat-out payment or whether it's some kind of a special loan. So do you know anything about that?
They used to have, there used to be a huge redevelopment program in the city of San Jose, and I used to work with that program. I worked with some low-income developers to help work with that, but the redevelopment agency no longer exists. So I think that there still are some, you know, for upgrading and like you said, you know, helping the blighted areas. I think there are still some grants and programs and maybe lower loan money for helping some of those situations, but the redevelopment agency is no longer here.
There's
And so there aren't any other towns in our county that have any programs of this type?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not
but
Saratoga?
They might have, yeah, exactly. Almost every town has an affordable housing commitment. All of them need to provide a certain amount of affordable housing, and whether or not they usually cannot meet the demand for, you know, obviously. And so whenever developers are going to maybe develop even a 12 unit, they might have to make 2 of them affordable units. So people don't even realize, even in your own neighborhoods, like in Los Gatos, there's a really cute development right across from Starbucks. They had a bunch of new homes there. 2 of those homes are only for affordable housing, so people can buy and rent those much cheaper than everybody else because they're covered. So a lot of the towns towns and cities locally do have affordable housing. You have to get on a list, you have to do some research, but there are some options out there. They're not widely advertised because they don't have very many units. But if you do your homework, there are some things out there.
Well, and I would say in general, any new development that you see, like the North 40 development going in Los Gatos, there probably will be a couple that are mandated. So that's the things to watch for is new developments and talk to who's ever in charge of
Get in the
building that.
line.
Yeah.
Get on the list. Yeah.
Great, that's very helpful.
Can I ask one question? Just one question?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Mobile home parks are no longer mobile in the sense that they take the wheels off, and then they can charge high taxes on a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 unit. Do you work with that field at all?
I sold one. The mobile home that I sold, this is where my knowledge comes from, is one client. It was a 1973 mobile home, and so it didn't have property tax. So I do understand that the newer units, you have to be really careful on the property tax. But if you need a mobile home expert, I have one for you. He's wonderful, and he lives at the Quill Hollow Park.
The other thing about mobile homes and what are the units that go together? Manufactured homes, most lending institutions won't lend on either. Some will.
But they
There-
do have lenders
But,
for
no,
mobile
that's what I was
homes.
gonna say. So there are lenders specific for mobile homes and for that. And as a matter of fact, some mobile home parks will only allow you to use the lender.
Their people.
of the park chosen, so.
That's good to know. One last question I was texted. What do you think about the opportunity of buying a foreclosed property? Do you have any advice? And also, where would you go about finding these? You know, if there's a website or what
So-
method you can point to?
So foreclosures literally happen on the courthouse steps, and you have to have cash. And you usually buy them sight unseen.
And some areas, like I was looking in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, they do have, they sort of tell you ahead of time, and you can actually get on the list, sometimes see the addresses and such. But you have to register early to be a bidder on those homes. And again, they prefer cash or, whatever. So foreclosures in general, before they get foreclosed, there's this other thing called real estate owned or REO or bank-owned property. So if somebody perhaps hasn't been able to pay their mortgage for a number of months and now the bank is trying to take it back, before they go full foreclosure, they try to sell it while they still own it and pay back the bank as much as possible, et cetera. So those do get sold below market levels usually. I think that's a great deal, and there's so few in this area that actually goes to that point. But the ones that I have seen, sometimes because they haven't had money for a while, a lot of times those homes are deeply in disrepair. So be prepared if you're able to find a great deal. Really try and have a look and make sure you know what your overall payment or your overall investment is going to be in the property, because it might be a lot more than you were originally thinking.
And say again, how would I go about finding foreclosure deals?
Well, once before they become foreclosed, they go into, we have a status on our side called short sales, or REO, which is real estate owned, meaning owned by the bank or institution. Those are the ones people would want to look for. So we can do searches on that. There's not very many out there, but they still exist.
And you can buy, I think it's through the county, you can subscribe to the list of foreclosed properties.
Oh, that's good.
So you pay for the list, and you don't generally use a realtor. And when the downturn happened, all the short sales and REO homes, a lot of them couldn't get loans on them because they were in such bad condition.
Sometimes they won't even have toilets.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it's just amazing
And
what people do.
that was after the downturn, and we haven't really
We
seen
haven't
that.
seen anything
So I don't,
like that,
yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't focus in on it. I wouldn't make it like your goal.
That's why people mostly pay cash, because the banks aren't gonna lend on something that is a hazard to you, and it has to have running water, it has to have a toilet, it has to have just some
Yeah.
basic things, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Darn banks.
Oh, this is great, and I'm sure there's a lot more questions, but I do want to respect everyone's time, and we decided we'd cut it off here. So let's all give a round of applause. A big thank you to each of you for being here.
I did bring a little bit of information. These are my buyer packages, so if you want a little bit of information on, things that you need to do when you're starting a home. And then also I think Celeste has some flyers on the affordable housing projects.
So
Or
there's two programs over
programs,
there.
yeah.
One's called Help, which will give you 10% down, And the other one is called Empower, which is, you can borrow up to 17%. And then there's something about Bank of America's grant program for first-time buyers.
Great, and that's all available back here? Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Max, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah,
I
we
guess
also,
we
there's
can.
a bunch of resources there. If you didn't get this flyer, I've kind of put together a website of news and calculators and everything kind of real estate that I've found. So if you want to check that out. If you have any more further questions, you can email the sfc1village@gmail.com or text that phone number again. Dave and Sarah are going to be passing around surveys. If you just can take 5 minutes and just let us know what you thought and how it went, that'd be great. I want to give a big thank you to the AV team. They do a lot. It's unappreciated. So, and all the other senior staff here at church, and Bob Connors especially, who helped us a lot, and the local outreach team. So I again want to thank them as well. But yeah, thank you all for.
Also, and company for putting on this whole event. We really appreciate it.